All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get going. So I'm going to call back to order the council workshop that originated on Monday, February 9th and reconvened for Tuesday, February 10th at 5 o'clock. We got through section A last night. Lots of discussion, really good discussion. I think it gave a better picture of council's views on a number of the parts of this. But now we're going to continue on. I think we can move right along to Mr. Zhang's presentation. Because from a time management perspective, we do have a workshop at 7 o'clock as well. So our best we have to keep that time on time. So I can't just start the second meeting when we finish the first meeting. We're going to try and keep on time for those two. Mr. Zhang.
Great, thank you, Worship. So, as you remember, last night when Jason talked about where SMUH might go. So tonight we'll be delving into what the SMUH zones may look like. And my presentation will contain 4 parts. There we go. So the first one, we're going to talk about what went into the development of these zones. Secondly, what the proposed zones could look like. What the proposed regulations are. Third, some renderings to show what the SMUH zones could look like. And lastly, some key topics for seeking council's feedback, similar to what we had yesterday. And before we start, just a brief note about terminology. So you'll hear me refer to these developments as SMUH, or houseplex, multiplex, or R3. These all mean the same thing. SMUH is obviously from the legislation. Houseplex and multiplex refer to the type of buildings they are, and R3 is the abbreviation in our new draft zoning bylaw, similar to how we have RS1, RS2, etc. So Tamsin will be talking about that in our 7 o'clock workshop. So moving right along to the first part is what contributed to our proposed SMUH zone. So obviously, SMUH does not exist in isolation. So the first big piece of information that we had to consume and incorporate into the SMUH zone are the provincial regulations and the provincial recommended site standards. Of course, that is not the be-all and end-all. Staff just took that as a starting point. We didn't just copy it and say we did it. So next thing is the zoning bylaw rewrite. So as I mentioned earlier, that is a concurrent process that's happening right now, where the district is updating our entire zoning bylaw, 1965, and we are incorporating many of the principles that are guiding that process. So things like improving the livability of our residential units, promoting climate resilience, simplifying regulations, facilitating housing diversity, and respecting existing character. Third, we looked at what we heard from the public in terms of changes to our single-family neighborhoods. Now, single-family neighborhoods have been an interest for us over the last few decades, but most recently, we heard from the public workshops on housing options in 2022, and also the first round of SMUH engagement in 2024, and most recently, in 2025, we looked at proposed changes to single-family zones. And really, we heard from the public there was general support for lifting basements and living spaces out of the ground, providing more streamline and flexibility in terms of the regulations for buildings in single-family neighborhoods. And there was a really strong push for enabling multi-generational living. So that was kind of a key takeaway in terms of community feedback. Then we looked at the proposed changes to single-family zones that we discussed back in December of last year. And what we tried to do there is we understand that because of the hazard exemptions, there will be SMUH zones that are adjacent or really close to house and coach house zones. So how do we, as staff, ensure that there is the maximum amount of consistency between those zones so these developments don't stand out too much? Fifth, we did a lot of technical testing with architects, builders, those who are familiar with development neighborhoods, to make sure that the zones that we propose work on the various lot sizes, shapes, and topographies. And finally, we looked at other municipalities, and we sort of have a second mover advantage when it comes to SMUH here, so that we try to align ourselves with what has worked, for example, some kind of good regulations coming out of the state, and also to avoid what didn't work well. For example, I think we have seen some, perhaps you guys have seen in the news, some pushback. We try to avoid those. And I put this kind of in a cycle to show that, it wasn't a kind of linear process. We really kind of went through that cycle many, many times, because sometimes what works in another municipality, we realize, okay, well, that doesn't work for our topography, or what is aligned with technical testing, or maybe no longer aligns with our principles of simplicity. And maybe some of the changes don't align with what we heard from the public. So we went through this process multiple times. So with that said, let's take a look at the proposed regulations. So there's really no kind of way to simplify the information without diluting it. So I'm just presenting it as is. And I will walk through this table with you one line at a time. So before I show the table, I just want to remind folks from yesterday, we have a small legend on the left. You don't need to really see the individual lots, but the idea is that, as Jason mentioned yesterday, we will have two variations of the SMUH zone, one to permit up to 4 units and one to permit up to 6 units. So the first one we're going to look at is the zone that permits up to 4 units, and that's the light blue, kind of the larger area you see there. So we have the metrics on the left. I think I even have a laser pointer. This one on the TV. And then in the first column are the provincial site standards. So these are the recommendations from the province. And on the right are what the staff are proposing for the district. And again, so we're starting with a 4-unit zone. So in terms of the number of units, that's sort of self-explanatory. We have to permit up to 4 units. So FSR, in terms of density, the province has not recommended the use of floor space ratio, which is FSR. However, in our experience, we found that using both an FSR limit in conjunction with building envelope limits really helps to create housing or building topographies that are more sensitive and that are more articulated. And you'll see that a couple things I'll note about this. The first is the 0.7 to 1.0. And if you remember back from when we had our December workshop on single family, one of the things that we're proposing is to simplify density calculations. So instead of saying it's 0.35 plus all these hidden exemptions, we're just giving people upfront the total floor space, and everything counts. There's no more exemptions aside from a few minor ones. So that's where that 0.7 comes from. The second is that you'll see that there's a range. And one of the things that we're proposing is the concept of tiered density. So what I mean by that is that as you go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, that your maximum permitted density increases slightly. So right now it's proposed to be at roughly 500 extra square foot per unit. And the logic behind that is twofold. So one is to ensure that the units, as you design for more units on lot, the units will just become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the second is to tie that density with producing housing dwelling units. So you're not just getting increased density for a much bigger single family dwelling, you're tying that with delivering more housing units. The next 3 rows are about setbacks. So for the front setback, the province has recommended 2 meters or 6 feet. We are recommending 3 meters or 10 feet, and that's just reflective of kind of the larger lots we have in the district. And this is consistent with what we have proposed previously for the single family changes. It's a little bit there's a little bit of nuance to it, but I won't get into too much detail. But rear setbacks, again, the province is recommending 1.5 meters. We're saying that 1.5 meters could work, but only if there is a lane. Recognizing that we have a lot of lots in the district, but the majority of them don't have lanes. We're saying if there is no lane, then setback should be 10 feet. So we don't have, perhaps coach houses right up against each other or multiplexes. Side setback, that's consistent with what we have currently. Number of stories. So the province is recommending 3 stories, and that's something that we've talked about quite a bit, both with the community and with council at this workshop. And the majority of the feedback we received from Calgary was that there was support, general support for 3 stories in exchange for moving that space up from the basement. However, where we differ from the province is we're recommending 2 stories for the building in the rear yard, and that's to be consistent with what we have currently permitted for coach houses. Coach houses is, you can almost think of it as a coach house as a multiplex building that's 1 unit in the rear yard. So to promote that consistency. So 3 stories in the front, 2 stories in the back. Building height. Again, this is something we discussed previously. I would say this is pretty much exactly the same as what the province has recommended, because when you go up to 3 stories, that does come with a certain level of height. The slight variation in numbers is just a result, artifact of the measuring technique. The number of buildings, so the province has not made any recommendations on the total number of buildings permitted on lot. Staff are currently proposing a maximum of 2 buildings, because I think our lots are not so large that 4 or 6 completely separate buildings would fit in our existing neighborhoods. And also just to be consistent with what is currently out there in our neighborhoods, which is typically 1 or 2 buildings. Building coverage, our coverage is proposed to be slightly lower than what the province recommended. Again, that's to do with our slightly larger lots.
And why is there a range there?
There is a range there to deal with the variation in lot sizes, because we have some 33-foot lots. If we restrict it to 40%, then you run into buildable issues.
Yeah. Thank you.
And in terms of off-street parking, again, I've highlighted where we differ from the province. I think our rate is slightly higher in terms of parking. But what's to note here is that the parking ratio for 1, 2, and 3 units is exactly the same as what we currently require for our existing single-family zone. So for the first unit, 2 stalls. Once you add a second unit, whether it be a house or suite or coach house, 3 stalls. Once you have 3 units, it's still 3 stalls, and we're adding 1 extra one if you're going to a 4+. Okay. So moving on to the 6-unit zone. So again, this is for the darker blue areas that you'll see in the Lynn Valley area and the landscape Marine Drive area. Obviously, this is, if you remember from yesterday, my council made pass a resolution to seek an extension in that area, in which case the 6-unit may not apply. But in any case, staff are drafting the 6-unit zone. So since we've already seen the table and you guys are now proficient at reading this giant table, I'm not going to go through it one by line, because most of the regulations are similar to the 4-unit zone. The main difference is obviously that we are required to permit up to 6 units. You can see on the top, and all the other figures are slightly different, all as a result of that. So the density is slightly higher and the coverage is slightly higher, just due to the kind of geometry of permitting 6 units. What's the same is setbacks, the number of buildings, and the total height. So in the 6-unit zone, you're still restricted to 3 in the front, 2 stories in the back. Now, one thing I will bring council's attention to is parking. So as some of you are aware from Bill 44, 25 is that parking is not permitted to be required by municipalities in the 6-unit SMUH zone. So our minimum parking requirement must be 0. So as you can see, we've abided by the legislation and the requirement is 0. However, parking can be voluntarily provided by the developer. In that case, the district is able to set the dimensions and kind of other things related to the park, but we cannot require the park. All right, so again, this is a visual representation of what some of the topics that we discussed. So, for example, the topic of 2 buildings. So there you can see a 1 building multiplex on the left, a duplex in the front, and a duplex in the back. There is freedom of configurations, so we haven't specified exactly how you need to configure your units. So you could have all 4 units in 1 building, or you can have a duplex in the front, or maybe even a triplex in the front, 1 house in the back. So that is sort of up to the individual property owners to make it fit for whatever works for their needs. Again, this also illustrates the height. So 3 stories is the maximum, and on the right you show that concept of 3 in the front and 2 in the back. And lastly, I just want to point out that partial basements are proposed to be permitted because partial basements are necessary to negotiate with the grades that exist in the district. And these renderings were shown to the public in the first round of SMUH public engagement in 2024, and there was general support. So here's another rendering of what it could look like. So this is a rendering of an existing, obviously it's been converted for privacy reasons to artistic kind of handwriting style. This is a typical flat neighborhood in the district where we chose to show both kind of the 2-story new build, 1-story rancher, and a 3-story. In this case, this is 4 units, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. You can see the doors there. This is just one. Obviously, it's for illustrative purposes only, but this is just one instance of what it could look like. Because of the reduced setbacks, you can imagine this building moving forward a bit to maybe perhaps have less shadowing impact on the neighboring rear yards. You could have a side entry garage if you wanted to. So there's many ways of producing a mobile units. So the next rendering is an elevation view rather than a perspective view. Again, this is comparing the SMUH development in the middle, a 3-story against a newer house that's constructed under our existing zoning bylaw, 2 stories on the left, and on the far left, a 1-story rancher with a basement. And I've just placed a rendering from our December 2nd workshop as for comparison of what the proposed changes to the new single-family zone could produce. So I think I'm of the opinion that I fully recognize that the first SMUH to be produced or to go in will absolutely stand out, and we've seen this in many other municipalities. But I think over time, as other SMUH-like developments take place, and also as single-family redeveloped under our new proposed single-family zones, most likely the urban form will be predominant. So that's really the next topic here is that kind of consistency within the neighborhood. So, neighborhood consistency. So I sort of mentioned this at the beginning. Because of the proposed exempted areas highlighted in purple, and the proposed SMUH areas highlighted in blue, we can imagine there'll be thousands of cases where a lot is zoned for SMUH, and right adjacent to it, there's a lot that is not zoned for SMUH. So staff kind of looked at that and thought, how can we, we are legislated to permit this type of density, but what can we do to ensure that there's kind of a maximum amount of kind of harmony between these types of developments that will inevitably be right next to each other or right across the street from each other. So what I have here is another table, and you don't have to look at it in too much detail, but on the left is the new proposed single-family zones that we talked about previously in the December workshop. And on the right is what is proposed that we just talked about right now. What I've highlighted are all the elements that are similar or identical between the two zones. And so really my key takeaway for this slide is that there's more that's similar about these two zones than that are different. So, and what's different all stem from the required density to be permitted. So we're required to permit up 4, 5, or 6 units. But things like parking, height, setbacks, those are all actually identical. So hopefully, once these developments start going in next to new single-family developments, that the visual kind of massing of the building from the street will be roughly the same. And to illustrate that, what I just talked about. So here is a side view of a lot. So you can imagine the properties are typical 120-foot deep lot. The front property line is to the left, and the rear property line is to the right. And the red dotted line shows the building envelope. So we talked about 3 stories roughly, and the gray is sort of where the masses go, the 3 stories in the front and 2 stories in the back. And the overall building envelope is actually identical for the proposed new single-family zone and the SSMUH zone. So
This would be with a lane, right? If it weren't with a lane, it would have a bigger.
that's right, that's right. So this would be the lane. Obviously, without a lane, it would be 10 feet, as
Thank you.
mentioned previously. Good eye. So really, what's different is sort of the terminology. So in a new zone, the front building, we would just call it a house with a suite, and in a multiplex zone, we would call it obviously a multiplex. It could contain up to 6 units. And the rear building in the new single-family zone would be called a coach house, and obviously in the new SSMUH zone could be a multiplex. So again, we're trying to kind of streamline the zoning bylaw by aligning, taking that opportunity that's presented to us with the zoning bylaw rewriting, change the single family and the legislative requirements to bring these 3 kind of together. Basements, here we go. So last I want to draw your attention to the issue of fully buried basements. So as council will remember from previous workshop, there's a host of reasons why there's staff and community support for bringing basements out of the ground, and that could be livability of the units, accessibility, impacts groundwater, construction costs, excavation, soil disturbance, etc. So we carry that principle over from the single-family changes, the proposed single-family changes, to the proposed smoothing. So this is the current state of what's proposed for SSMUH. We have 3 stories with no basement, that's permitted. 3 stories with partial basement, that's permitted. Again, this is to do with in order to negotiate grade. And 3 stories where the first story is completely a basement, that's currently proposed to be not permitted. And at the previous meeting, certainly it was brought up by some members of the council in terms of issues of non-conforming. In essence, the question is, what if I have a currently fully buried basement? So staff kind of went away and did some research on that topic. So I have a little table on the right. So as it turns out, even if you have a existing basement that's fully built below grade, the majority of the things that you want to do with that are still permitted. So for example, if you want to continue the use of your basement, that's totally fine. If you want to convert it to a suite, that will be permitted. If you want to add entries, you want to add windows, you want to add window wells, again, that's still permitted. If you want to renovate it, permitted. If you want to repair it, permitted. In fact, the only 2 things you would not be permitted to do is to expand your existing nonconformity, so expanding a fully buried basement, or to fully replace a basement. So whether it be damage through earthquake, fire, etc. And those cases are actually pretty rare. We did a search through our building permitting system, and we had 13 permits for expanding basements over the last 20 years. So just under one permit per year. I will note that various processes do exist for that. So, for example, for the variance, and obviously council could grant variance in case of hardship. So, and lastly, I know I said lastly previously, but this was a topic that we did not have time to get into yesterday. We ran out of time. So this is the topic of SLIAs, or small lot infill areas. So I think council may have seen it through various subdivisions, but small infill areas are, in essence, 26 zones in the district, and those are highlighted in purple. You can see they're kind of majority in the western part of the district, but there's a couple in Deep Cove, where there's a historic lot pattern of narrower lots. So what the zoning bylaw basically says that in these special areas, as long as your lot can produce new lots that are at a minimum 10 meters or 33 foot, then those lots will be zoning compliant. So typically RS3, RS4 lots have much wider zoning requirements for newly created lots. So up to typically 18 meters. But the zoning bylaw basically, we've created policy, Tamsin might have to help me out at some point. I don't remember when they came in, but at the time it was recognized that these areas traditionally had narrower lots. So they are suitable areas for gentle density through subdivision. Now, this is something that, a topic that we're going to raise with council to see, in light of new regulations around permitting 4 to 6 units, is SLIAs something that council still want to continue with the new zoning bylaw? Perhaps, because obviously when SLIAs were created, we were not imagining that one lot would turn into 8 units or perhaps 12 units. So just something for council to think about. And if you have any questions, we're happy to discuss that.
Kevin?
Yeah.
On the SLIA, like talking to Dan, are there restrictive covenants? When they were created, were there any restrictive covenants registered on title on SLIA properties?
The covenants, we typically register them as a condition of subdivision. So there are certainly covenants that could limit the units, the covenants for other things like stormwater management, etc. But for council's discussion tonight, it's kind of forward looking, because for lots that have not undergone subdivision, do we still want to apply this SLIA policy? Exactly. And obviously covenants override SMUH legislation.
That's right.
So if a covenant exists on title, that supersedes the requirements from Bill 44.
Can I just ask one more thing about the covenants then?
Yeah.
So the covenants take precedent?
Yeah.
So the covenants that were placed on lots down in Roslyn, Beachview, Baycrest, those, there's covenants on many of those single-family lots down there to protect the views that have gone to court and have been successful in those challenges.
Successfully upheld?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would take precedent as well.
That's right,
Mr. Milburn.
Too bad we didn't covenant everything.
Just to confirm,
Would've been a solution.
just to confirm Kevin's comments, yes, the province in their legislation indicated that covenants were still enforceable. However, they said they will monitor implementation of SMUH, and in fact, just last year sent out a questionnaire to local governments asking them about whether or not they felt private covenants, not even municipal covenants, but private covenants were in any way inhibiting the development of SMUH, because they were pondering whether or not they would introduce legislation to overrule those covenants. So they haven't done that yet, but they're contemplating it.
The SLIA in the Cove, those ones are along Panorama Drive. Those have been around for a long, 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 long time. I mean, the last SLEA we did was in Upper Capilano
Yeah.
in Edgemont.
That's
Sort
right.
of 15, 20
Yeah,
system.
yeah, and it was very divisive. But yeah, I mean, why would we continue that with this new, it doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent point. I would just point out one other nuance with this map. You'll see there's two types of purple.
Yeah.
So the lighter purple just indicates this property is within a SLEA. But the SLEA regulation still says you have to, in order to subdivide, you have to produce lots that are at least 10 meters. So we've gone through and highlighted lots that are at least 20 meters. So when we do that, then the number of lots, we have roughly 1,000 lots that are in these 26 SLEAs, but really only 85 or so of them are able to be that, or at least 20 meters. So yeah, that could be subdivided to satisfy the zone. Yeah. And I will just add one other note is, subdivision is at the discretion of the approving officer. So zoning compliance doesn't guarantee subdivision. So even if we kept it in there, it's at the end of the day, the approving officer still kind of takes that just into consideration in their decision.
Thank you. Can you comment on the number of subdivisions that have happened in these SLEAs, just like what the average number is?
Mr. Milburn?
Last time I looked back, about 15 years worth of records, we on average created about 6 new lots a year on average, but that included large lot subdivisions as well as SLEAs. So SLEAs were in the range really of, sort of 0 to 6 a year, right, at the most. It's not a huge generator of density historically, relative to the number of, say, single-family homes that are torn down, right, and converted to other uses.
The only challenge was that for so long we've been producing lots that were 20 meters or less, that it just happened to be all the heritage homes that were on 70 wide lots. And so in Lynn Valley in particular and around Ross, Baird, Harold, that section of Lynn Valley, it was like heritage home, heritage home, heritage home that were all subject to subdivisions because they were over 70 wide, whereas the other. Mr. Milburn?
Well, you were like, I guess I can say that, the intent of this at the time was in a different circumstance, right? It was without small lot, it's small lot infill before SMUH. And, looking at what SMUH could bring in terms of the number of the new units and how we might try to deal with that, we think if we have to do that, if that is something that the province is mandating and council follows through and amends the zoning to SMUH, that SLEA is probably something that we would want to eliminate. Because it would create a higher level of density potential than originally conceived when SLEA was first developed. And that from the initial analysis that we did showing council the servicing challenged areas, these areas could be challenged by the level of density anticipated by SMUH if you were to create the smaller lots. And so at this stage, we're recommending that this would probably be something that would go away, would be our advice.
Can I just clarify something? When you say, make it go away, if you're an existing SLEA, you get this treated like any other lot, so you can't do. But then it goes against what's the original plan to control density in that area, is it not?
Yeah, well, every existing lot, the intention of SMUH is that you would get that 4-unit or 6-unit permission. But by eliminating SLEA means you wouldn't be doubling essentially that potential, because SLEA right now allows the potential of more lots subject to subdivision.
Right, but I'm looking at existing SLEA. So putting SMUH in will go counter to what was originally envisioned.
Yeah, even so, SLEAs that have developed are probably not in the 40 to 50-year-old range. They're in the 20 to 30 and probably still a viable product. Okay.
Okay, well, now this is really my last slide. So, in essence, we talked a lot about various things, and I'm sure that's a lot of information. So we're happy to answer any clarifications from council. But in essence, we're seeking council's input on these 4 key topics. The first one, the most important is, the council's feedback on the overall direction that we've taken in terms of drafting of the SMUH zones. Not just in terms of the guiding principles, but the figures, and you have them in your table in terms of the densities, the setbacks, heights, building coverage, parking, etc. The next one is the concept of ensuring maximum consistency between the SMUH zone and the new single-family zone, because they will be adjacent to each other in many cases throughout our community. The last one is, sorry, the second last one is our current stance on prohibiting fully buried basements. And the last one, as we just discussed, is the approach to whether to continue or remove SLEAs. So at this point, I'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Zhang. Can you give me, what's our average lot size again?
Our most common one is probably 7,500 square feet.
That's just the most common lot format, or is that the average lot size?
The most common, yeah.
Most common, but our average, because we'd include acreages, would be a little larger than
Yeah,
that.
I
10
mean, probably, yes.
So at one FSR, we're talking about 7,000 square foot houses being produced above ground with no basin on those lots. Is that correct? 50% lot coverage, 2-story building, one FSR is a 7,300 square foot building. Is that correct?
Through your worship, in terms of if you're talking about a house, then the density will be closer to 0.7 or 0.75, I think.
But if it's broken up into 2 buildings, then it would be 7,000 square, up to 7,500 square feet for an average lot in spread between 2 buildings. Is that a fair representation?
Yeah, it would be once you're approaching the 4 to 6 unit. If it's just a house, then it would be closer to 0.7, which is 5,500 square feet.
So if you have a 12,000 square foot lot and someone builds to the maximum, we're talking about a 9,000 plus square foot house on the lot. Is that?
We do have absolute maximum caps for the zones as well. So I think Thompson could add to that.
And that's, and that's RS zone based?
Yeah, very similar to what we have in the 19 different single-family zones, where we're keeping that concept of having a maximum cap. So if you have one of the very large lots, you don't build a home that is huge, huge, huge. It's still a large home, but those caps are also tiered. So if you, and again, this is an option for council, but the basic concept, matching the single-family discussion we had last year. So the number looks bigger because we're counting the basement now and we're counting the garage now. But that, the home that was built next to me, easily 5,000 square feet under the RS zoning, on that lot, under the new zoning, on whether it's R2 or R3, they would be able to build the same size house. The difference is in the R3, you can divide it up into more units. So the square footage doesn't change significantly, it's how you divide it up. The one difference with the tier, and we've heard this from the public, a few residents said, okay, we're interested in multi-generational housing. We know we need more options for our kids and for our parents, but we're worried about single-family homes getting too large. So can you cap the size and only give a little extra square footage if they build that extra unit? And so what we've done is we've kept the size for single-family homes and suites the same, so that existing homes remain conforming and don't have non-conforming problems. But if you're building a coach house, you get 500 square feet extra. And if you're in a multiplex or SMUH zone, and you build that 4th unit, you would get that extra 500 square feet and so on. And so we've just tried to recognize that means that each unit can still be a livable, good-sized unit in accordance with the intent of the regulation and the comments we've heard from the community, especially with regards to the coach house piece. Most of this was set up thinking more about house suite coach house. Because the other thing I would add to Kevin's presentation is it's absolutely key for these two zones to be very similar, because not only are they side by side, but many people won't be building a multiplex. They'll be keeping the house they have, and maybe over time wanting to put in either a suite or a coach house for family members. And so we wanted that ability to keep that single family pattern. I hope that kind of answers, and hopefully I didn't go on too long. I tend to get excited about this subject, so my apologies.
You know what, I do think it's important to put it in there, so we've just put it in there that it's 0.7 FSR, 1 FSR. It's very important to say to a maximum in each group, and this is what the maximum is in each group. I think that's kind of relevant.
Yeah.
Because if, otherwise you tell people that it's a 1 FSR, they're gonna do a quick lot calculation, go, cool, I can build a 9,000 square foot house. And so, what I'm looking for is an assurance that we're not just creating mansion size imposition. Again, with an asymmetry in the block face, because it's probably gonna happen slowly over time, where you're all of a sudden gonna have rancher, 9,000 square foot, not 9,000, but to the cap of the yard of the single family. So what are the caps of the different single families, just to give us a ballpark for those caps?
I think that the range is from, like from 7,000 up to 8,000. Yeah.
Really, yeah, and again, the numbers sound big
Yeah.
because of that basement piece, and they are big.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what we
Maybe
see
I'll.
getting built is big.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just put this kind of into perspective. Is you can start in terms of just talking about the average lot, right? We start with the floor and the ceiling. The floor, we're actually around 5,500 square feet. Those are building permits we're issuing today on those average lots, is 5,500 square feet with basements and everything. These are new builds that we're permitting right now in the last five or so years. So that's kind of where we're starting at. And like you said, we'll be moving up to kind of close to 8,000 square feet as you go up to the units, going 4, 5, 6 units. So then you end up with units. So if 7,000 or 6 units, you end up with units that are just over 1,000 square foot per unit. So we did want to have units that were kind of suitable for families. We didn't want to, if we capped it at exactly what single family was able to do, then the units just get smaller and smaller and smaller.
I guess, the example I keep coming back to my own house. So my own house, I couldn't rebuild under this legislation. And the assumption is that it's the height that's the problem on the lot, even though it's a steep lot. The reality is the renderings that are drawn here are done fairly sympathetically in a gentle way. You had the bad actor model and you went and said, but just as a warning, this is what it could look like if someone cubed out the space, or if somebody moved the lot far forward, so that one there, the one back. So you have comparators with the neighboring property. Can you just sort of point to where a 5 foot or 10 foot setback looks like on the property?
So I believe in this case, the property line is right around here. So 10-foot setback would be probably around here.
It's currently a 30-foot setback from there, and so it'd be losing about a third of that setback. Is that correct?
That's right. And Tamsin can jump in again with more of the details, but the 10-foot setback is not for the entire building. It's only a portion. So again, it replicates what we currently allow in the front yard for garages. So we currently allow, your building a setback is 25 feet, but you're allowed to protrude into that 25 feet with a 7-inch garage. And we're proposing that space be used for a living space as well. So it's not your entire building moving forward to 10 feet, it's a portion.
Yeah, I'm just saying a building with a flat roof moved to the front will be far more imposing than my house which has an almost 40-foot setback and is recessed further because the peak is in the middle of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point because to kind of consider the different impacts. I think from the street, a house right up to the, as close as you can get is imposing for people walking down the street. But for the next door neighbor, they probably prefer you to move your house as forward as you can, because people are not using their front yard as much. And they'd rather not have that overlook over their backyards. So,
No,
I-
no,
I
no.
don't-
Let's use some examples like on Skyline, where that happened because
Yeah.
the property owner wanted to move a pool in the front and a cement wall went up and all of a sudden their whole front yard was a wall. That's maybe a perspective that you have, but I don't think that's shared.
Well,
We
sorry.
did survey on this point about bringing houses closer to the front, and that was well supported, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was like extremely well supported. And I think, while you're quite right, there are exceptions where you have used, in many cases, people see the front yard as something they have to know, but not something they enjoy. There's special space where they relax and barbecue and so on happens in the backyard. And so it's the backyard they wanna keep the sun getting to, keep more privacy and enjoy just more. And so the more you kind of slide further forward, the less impact there is on the earth. That was the logic, and I think why we got so much support for this idea when we surveyed last spring.
But it depends on the geography.
Again, though, when we present the public with option A and option B, and option A is slam your hand in the door, and option B is kick a night table with your shin, right? Like, it's hard, it's hard to say that that's a representation of the will of the public. I'm pretty sure when we asked them if they preferred to have less front yard, we said in exchange for more backyard specifically. We didn't ask them, hey, do you want to change things right now and move to smaller front yards? We gave them two very carefully curated options to choose from that, I don't think are representative of status quo, future option one, future option two. Because I think you get a bit of a different response. And the reason why I say that is because in the cases that I'm aware of where they've done the side entry front garage, or they've had built the front right up to the edge of the property line, or had maybe had taken the average height that they could build from a weird spot on the property, which produced a bit of an anomaly. We had very negative responses from people. So I think that it would be better if we also showed an example of what could happen if it wasn't done sensitively but was allowed within the rules.
Yeah.
And also what would happen to a lot of houses that would become non-conforming in the process, like mine as an example. But I don't have a problem with our position on the first one, which is the up to 4 units. I still don't have a full understanding of the 0.7 to 1 FSR. I'd love to see it broken out across the different zones and really, because what I heard there is that you could still build an 8,000 square foot under the new calculation. And yeah, I thought my house was big at 4,700 square feet, including the basement and the garage. And so 8,000 square feet on a lot sounds ridiculous, and not really what we set out to do at the beginning. I have a problem with the front yard setback. I'm not supportive of the 10-foot or the province's 6-foot. I think that determination of a setback was done based on, perhaps a municipality with different lot layout. Some of our lots are 140 feet deep, and therefore why am I pushing forward into the front yard setback when I have plenty of space at the back? In which case it would make more sense for the front yard line to be affected by how far it is from the back property line, because maybe it's not necessary to come forward because you've got enough lot depth. And therefore we could preserve the frontage aspect of it. And since we do have some neighborhoods where obviously because they follow contours and stuff, you'll have varying degrees backyard or total lot length. But for the most part, on a block face, the lot length is pretty typical. When it comes to 3 stories versus 2 stories, again, you've heard my comments that I think I think there should be some approving officer flexibility on that or some other piece in there, because sometimes on the shape of a lot, on the steepness of a lot, other things may make some sense. On the pitched or flat roof, actually the next 4 things I'm generally in support of, but I did just have one more question about flat roof, if I may. Maybe it's just a very West Coast view of it, but I kind of thought that flat roofs were generally to be discouraged because of our rain. We are on the edge of a rainforest. A flat roof, flat roofs are much more prone to leaks and flooding issues than peaked roofs are. And so I kind of thought we would want to actively dissuade flat roof based on our local climate on the North Shore. Do you have any comment about flat versus pitched?
Sure, through your worship, I totally agree. I think pitch roof does work for our climate. And we, in our zoning bylaw, I think we encourage pitch roofs by just allowing different heights. You know, the more pitched your roof is, we allow a different height. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you can require flat roofs through the zoning powers given to us.
Yeah, to develop permit guideline, we don't do that for something.
Could we?
For small scale multi-unit housing, the provincial government suggests you not follow a development permit system to kind of track the style of the development. Theoretically, you could set a development permit guideline that said it had to be pitched roof. We'd want to test that. You couldn't write it as a building code standard. It would have to be a design standard.
It just seems like it's something that we tend to, I think we should be encouraging or giving some kind of incentive to. Not the least of which is, you know, we won an award for the Solar City project, and it was taking advantage of pitched roofs and put solar panels on at an angle that was going to be much more efficient directly on the roofs themselves. And flat roof, you have to build a whole big apparatus to be able to do it. But also, it just seems like it's a rain risk in future. But so anyway, on the latter ones, I'm generally in support of them. But again, little frustrated that my now small house relative to the maximum square footage won't fit within the guidelines because of the changes, and would not be able to be replaced in the event of a fire or an earthquake, I heard. So that's...
So unless variances are granted.
Yeah, but why should I have to come and ask permission to read what was on there necessarily? You should be sort of protected to do that. That's always problematic. And it's also something that insurance will only cover certain aspects of a rebuild. And if you're forced into a totally different design, insurance doesn't necessarily cover it in the same way. So, okay. I haven't seen anyone else put their hand up. Oh, Councilor Murray.
So, but that's the non-conforming basement.
I have a partial basement.
Right. So, I don't know why we have to make the basements non-conforming. If the basements exist, why can't we just allow them to exist? And if somebody wants to build a basement, why can't we allow them? It's this perspective that we have these issues with water, and yes, probably most people won't build a basement, but what if people wanted to build a basement? Or what if there was a situation and then they were having to ask, as the mayor points out, having to ask for a variance? Why are we, why don't we allow flexibility and let people decide rather than us being so prescriptive? I think that's my concern. Yeah, I think the evolution of a community, we've seen that over the last decade, several decades. And where 10 years ago, we saw a huge spike in single family permits because of, mass amounts of speculation, particularly in the Capilano, where the geography is quite challenging, and we had multiple examples of speculators coming in, tearing down, building these massive houses, and changing the nature of the community depending on where they put a garage or a swimming pool, that completely negatively impacted. So although we've used a survey to guide some of our understanding as to what people understand, if you give them certain pictures and give them the best case scenarios, then it all seems so reasonable. But throw in the worst case scenarios, like the Wedge House, like Sunnycrest, and then all of a sudden it's very different. And the impacts are a lot greater. And that's what we're not really seeing in this presentation. We're not seeing, the brought forward, we're having to imagine it. We've seen on the news what some of these 4 and 6plexes look like in Burnaby, and there's no love lost in regards to that. I'm looking at the house down on St. Denis, that those duplexes that we zoned on St. Denis down in Inter River, where the backyards, they're all 3 of them were for sale. One sold, I believe. 2 are 1,700 square feet listed at $2 million. And one is 1,500 listed at 155. They, obviously a horrible time to list a property. There's the lot lines are as close to the road as you'll get. And I think it actually does depict these 10-foot setbacks. I can't remember what it was on that duplex, but in the photograph, I mean, the front yard is, the door is at the sidewalk. And then the backyard is completely covered in pavers and cement. There's 0 grass on the property except for a strip that runs down 2 sides. And so that's really, the impact of what this is going to look like in many cases. They're very good examples. And then you look at, and I always love this one, this is 1032 and 4106. One's Violet, one's Mount Seymour Parkway, just down from the mayor's house, subdivided in the 1960s. They were 25-foot lots. The guy that did it built my dad's house, Pete Marquist, and it was subdivided decades ago. And then it was built. The mayor probably could stand in the building and touch the wall from both sides. That's how narrow they are, 25-foot lot frontage and 124 deep. And they sold, the most recent listing sold for 1965. 1965 for a 25-foot lot frontage. So it kind of puts into perspective what we're dealing with. And sadly, if this legislation had been about true multi-generational or affordability, I think we would be looking at things very differently. Livability. The unintended consequences, Corey sent out a significant list of unintended consequences based on the legislation and based on what we're doing. And we talk very seldom about the impacts to the water table, to the hard surface. I mean, for years, we've been trying to manage these massive houses that are being built, the 9,000 ones in Capilano, a lot of them, and in the Cove. Massive homes being built, covered with hard surface. St. Denis is a perfect example of something that we actively rezoned. And the unintended consequences of our storms, regardless of whether you put a basement in, the St. Denis properties, they don't have basements, and they're all covered in hard surface. And where's all that water going, especially with the kind of, weather we get? So we're being asked to make these decisions without so much information. We touched on the financial cost of the infrastructure, who's going to pay for that. Certainly, the DCCs are going to cover a portion of it, but it's not going to cover that larger. And I'm wondering, Mike, you talked about, the advocacy that we need to, start. How are we going to keep track of all these unintended consequences? and the challenges that we're going to face as these things evolve. We know Coquitlam tried this. We know they had to hire 3 more planners. We know that it cost a lot more money on their books. We know it didn't net out a huge amount at all. There was no affordable housing. It was all market. So how are we going to keep track of these unintended consequences and the impacts to neighborhoods and livabilities? If a new government is elected, these issues and legislations are again debated, and we have a second look at what we're trying to achieve with tools that are giving no flexibility and putting the kind of pressure that this legislation is putting on municipalities. Okay.
Councillors Hanson and Moore. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and very clear and detailed way that you put it forward. I'll answer 2 questions. First, I do support the prohibition on fully buried basements, and I also support eliminating SLEA in the SLEA subdivisions in the face of SMUH. Like the mayor, I would like to comprehend the details of the tier density and also the 40 to 50 building coverage. I'd like to see that actually laid out for us.
Examples.
Yes, could you, Kevin, could this, we'll really concentrate, Kevin, and make sure we follow the issue.
Mr. Milburn.
Your worship, just while Kevin's looking at that, I'll give him a moment. Just to go back to an earlier comment by Councilor Murray, there was a question raised about the wedge house, and I think I probably had some ears. So just a reminder that the council amended the zoning bylaw 5 years ago, in 2021, to prevent the excessively high retaining walls on the edge of the property line, and instead it's a lower tiered model that was amended at the time. And then also from the wedge house, there was an issue about the height of the accessory building next door. And so council amended how accessory buildings are measured in terms of height to prevent that circumstance from occurring again. So I just wanted to remind council there were modifications made to to address those particular circumstances.
I think the point was, though, there's always unintended consequences with all of these things, and because we had the existing, because we amended later, but it was too late for the wedge house and it was too late for Sunnycrest. And it wasn't just the height of the accessory building, it was the location of the accessory building on the upside closest to the downward property, the wedge house, that ultimately created a wall effect down their property line rather than the flexibility. If we had had some within the bylaw, we could have required the neighbor to site the accessory building on the upside and there would have been 0 impact. And this is where there has to be some flexibility built into this in order to make some reasonable calls to limit the kind of impact that unintended consequences bring.
Kevin, you described it conceptually, and thank you for that. I understand conceptually
Picture.
what you were, but yeah, if you could actually go through the actual formulas. I know Mayor Little also requested these, so.
So yeah, thank you, through your worship. Well, the formulas are as you see here. So we have the units on the left side. Again, this is the tiered system that is currently proposed. So for 1 to 2 units, density is actually the same for both the R2, which is the new proposed single family zone. R3 is the SMUH zone that we're talking about tonight. And that is 0.55 plus 662 square feet up to a maximum of 7,500 square feet. And that's where sort of the 0.7 effective FSR comes from. It's a ratio plus a constant, and I think we discussed last time is to make sure that if you just use a ratio, then the smaller lots end up with being overly penalized, and they're not able to build kind of livable size units. And then as you go up, 3 units, The density is 0.55 plus 1161. How can this use that math here? 1161 square feet. And this in an R2 would be a house with a coach house. So, and then in R3 you could obviously do a triplex or duplex with a coach house or any other configuration. And R4, 4 units, we're moving up to 0.55 plus 1,600 square feet, up to a maximum of 8,500 square feet. And lastly, for the 5, 6 units, it's 1 FSR up to a maximum of 9,000 square feet.
That seems like a small square footage for a lot, though. Sorry, the example that you have is lot size times 0.55 plus 61.5 meters squared. Is that an average lot size, or is that your common lot size, or what? Because I know it scales a little bit based on the lot size too, doesn't it?
No.
Sorry. I get that the lot size is a variable within the equation.
That's right.
But it's,
You're right.
yeah,
And there's actually another hidden slide, but essentially this one was just to say, because most of our lots are over 5,000 square feet, this is the math that applies. For lots that are under 5,000 square feet, then that's where you have the higher ratios because they're smaller and more confined, and so the building to lot size is greater. But I think one of the things we're interested in hearing back and is on this notion of tiered density, because while it was raised by the community when we were having public meetings last year, it is one that does have impacts. The other thing I would note is if you do this math on a 7,500 square foot lot, you know, our most common lot size, then the first tier, you're not at the 7,500, you're only at, well, not only, but you're at 4,787. So it's, and then you would tier up from there, but you're not reaching that maximum cap unless you're a much larger lot.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I just continued Tamsin's math there. So if you went under that 7,500 square foot lot scenario, so my math matched Tamsin's for that 1 to 2 units would be 4,787 square feet. For the 3 units where you're adding that 161 square feet, you'd have a 5,286 square foot house. For 4 units, you'd be moving to 5,786. And for that 5 to 6 at the 1.0 full FSR, you're at 7,500.
All gross calculation because there's no longer a net calculation.
What were the other numbers?
And all out of the ground.
Yeah.
So 4,787, 5,286, 5,786, and 75.
5,700. So what was the other one? The last one?
That's
7,500.
3,000 square feet on a 10,000 square foot lot, and there's another 3,000 square feet behind it.
Councillor Hanson, just want to check. I believe the floor was yours.
Yeah, thank
Apologize
you.
for distracting, but it's yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so those are the details. Now, I'm just gonna work that back a bit conceptually as well. I mean, the vast majority are gonna be 1 to 4s. The 5s and 6s are in the high transit areas. So the vast majority of the district is gonna be the 1 to 4s. And the basic formula here is 55% with an add-on of a little over 500 square feet for each additional unit.
That's right. So.
With these caps. Okay, no,
Yeah,
thank you for that.
We did do the check, so you mentioned earlier, the current permitted floor space under the existing zoning bylaw for a single family is roughly 5,500 square feet for a 7,500 square foot lot.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And what about the 40 to 50% building coverage? Do you have a table for that?
Sorry, we don't have that, but we could certainly bring that back at some point.
And conceptually though, if you've got a bigger lot, you're restrained to the amount of building coverage. If you have a smaller lot, you can go up to the 50%.
That's right, yeah, all our regulations, similar to currently, have a kind of trigger point at 5,000 square feet where It's slightly different for lots smaller than 5,000 and versus lots bigger than 5,000. That's just kind of a logical point where you kind of need different formulas to make things work.
And then the other detail we haven't discussed is the lots under 3,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Three units, Liz. I gather there's only 58 lots or.
Three, I think, yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Could you lay out the formula for that?
It would be the max for the under 5,000 square foot ones. And Kevin, I think I added a slide that shows, it gets kind of muddy because there's so many numbers on it, but
There
it's
we
just,
go.
yeah, see, the top line is under 5,000 square feet, and then the second color is the over 5,000.
So
the-
it would be 0.7 plus 662.
And in
Oh,
terms
sorry,
of
this one.
your- So it's always the first tier is the small lot, the second tier is the regular lot.
All right, well, from my point of view, thank you very much for indulging me in this. From my point of view, what you're proposing is realistic. And I think we have to be careful to make sure that we're not frustrating the SHMOO program, given that we're a delegated authority of the provincial government, by having regulations that are not workable. And it does seem, based on the illustrations we put forward, that this is a workable plan and it's realistic for builders and takes into account as best we can the impacts on our communities. For the most part, I am supportive of these proposals.
I've got Councillor Ma next. Councillor Cook, did I see your hand?
Not yet.
Okay, so then it's Councillor Back and Councillor Murray. Councillor Ma, go ahead.
We're getting into a lot of details on the standards to accommodate SHMOO while trying to rewrite our zoning bylaw. And normally, I try to stay at the, 50,000 square foot or level. But,
It's in my head.
okay, but in this case, I believe we need to kind of look at these details, as Councillor Hanson mentioned, because we want to ensure we have a livable community. I do appreciate the staff's approach to try to tailor the standards as much as possible to be consistent between R2 and R3. And this will, in theory, preserve some of the existing characters in our established neighborhoods. So I have a couple of questions. When you limit to 2 buildings, is there a cap on each of the building? Like, can you have one dominant and one secondary? Like, you could almost put as much, can you put as much as you want into the dominant or primary building?
Yeah, I would say, through your worship, the front building could contain all your density. The back building, I think there would be some limitations due to the coverage, because you're limited to 2 stories, right? But there are also limits to maximum building length, limits to maximum building coverage in the rear yard. There's a bunch of other things that would make it infeasible to achieve your total density only within a rear building.
When we say we limit to 2 buildings, we don't necessarily indicate a potential split between the 2, like 60-40 kind of thing, or is that permitted?
No, we don't have a prescribed split. That'll be just what.
Or a cap? I'm looking at trying to avoid having one big dominant dwelling on the property.
Yeah. Anywhere on the property or in the back?
Well, I don't want to get into,
Yeah, okay.
but, you start talking about these big homes. So I hear that it's limited to 2, great. But is it going to be like huge and little, or can we say, 2 and the maximum that this building can have is 60% of the prescribed density? Is that something that's possible?
That is certainly possible, but that would require people to build 2 buildings.
Okay.
Because if people can build voluntarily just one building,
Okay.
then we must make it so that they're able to accommodate all the density.
Ah,
Unless we force people to say, you must build 2 buildings, we must build a coach house, then we can't really get into mandating a ratio.
okay. Good answer.
Okay, in terms of the off-street parking, fourplex, you need to have a certain number, depending on the number of units, but a sixplex, you don't. Is there anything that the district would be able to do to manage any potential conflicts between the neighbors? Like, are we getting into any discussions on that with our streets people, or is that something that's?
So, you have that?
Yeah, I was just thinking if potentially a property that could be under SSMUH developed fourplex could be next to the sixplex. The sixplex has no off-street parking requirement, whereas there is for the fourplex. Just looking ahead at unintended consequences, or, it's pretty obvious, we're gonna probably have some challenges there. What can we do to minimize that?
To minimize the challenges between the
Parking on the street and stuff.
the
Is there anything?
well, the sixplex were not permitted to require parking,
Off-street parking.
off-street parking. So the curb space is what it is. We can consider curbside management strategies, parking restrictions in the area, but we don't have a strategy. We have not considered a strategy for that at this time.
Mr. Milburn?
If I look at the provincial legislation, I think they're basically saying your strategy should be maximizing transit. So if you look at the 6 unit areas, they're based on the frequent transit definition and the regulation. So a way to manage it would be to support a bus rapid transit or higher levels of transit to reduce the demand for the parking. That's essentially what the provincial regulation contemplates.
Okay, let's just follow that line of reasoning. Lower cap, Carpenter area, that's potentially a sixplex. The BRT is not in sight, but we could be building homes potentially in 2 years. The timing's off.
It's not regulated on the BRT, it's regulated on a 15-minute service from at least one of the routes in that neighborhood. And so that already exists in both that corridor and Lynn Valley. It's not timed to coincide with the BRT
And
implementation.
my point was, the question I believe was asking, in the future, like how could we mitigate in the future? I'm saying, well, enhance levels of service so that people have less demand for the parking space is essentially what the provincial government suggested. But of course, that doesn't necessarily come with a check, right, in terms of support. But we have the funding now with TransLink for the planning of BRT. That planning is going ahead, and it's in the mayor's plan for future funding, subject, of course, to provincial and transit decisions.
Mr. Zhang?
I was going to point out, I noticed that Mr. Cohen online is able to provide a response.
Oh, I'm not logged in. Mr. Cohen, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, Council. So, Councillor Ma, the question you've raised is actually something that is on the mind of staff as well as we start to go into more densifying our single-family neighborhoods. There's obviously going to be a higher pressure on the existing street because the street isn't expanding. It's the same amount of space, and there's potentially more units coming to a street. Through our transportation team, we are going to be working on the curbside management strategy. As was shared in the presentation last night, we anticipate the uptake of SSMUH to not necessarily be significant, but this is certainly an area that we're going to have to be looking at and figuring out as we see certain parts of our community starting to uptake some of these 4 and 6 plexes, trying to identify how do we manage this best with all those competing needs. As you've shared also, a 6-plex, while the province hasn't indicated that the municipality can't require parking on site, we would anticipate that those that develop on the North Shore recognize the transportation challenges that we have and that they voluntarily identify parking on their side as well. So it's not a perfect answer, I will certainly admit that, but it's certainly a challenge that we have with the new provincial legislation, and particularly as we look at the existing transit and the lack of commitments for transit on shore. It's potentially going to be a problem, but it all comes down to the market and the uptake of these 4 and 6 plexes.
Okay, no, I appreciate it, that, Mr. Cohen. Just kind of going through this list here. In terms of fully buried basements, you know, is there a case that could be made where a site needs a basement, or like, is there any possibility that if we restricted, then this site's not going to recognize this potential, or really anything that can be built underground can't be built above ground? Like, I'm just trying to get an understanding where are we limiting anyone by saying we can't build a basement?
Through your worship, I think that's a good question. I mean, there are so many scenarios in the district that I'd be hesitant to say there's absolutely no reason, but I would say for the most part, if you are able to build what you can above grid, but there could be really one-off scenarios where basement is required. And by that I mean a full basement, not a partial basement, because most of the grade challenges can be accomplished through partial basements, where it's at grade on one side and fully buried on the other, which is permanent.
Would there be a process for someone to appeal? Okay. Fine.
Your worship, I've worked with certain industrial commercial developers that really need basements for electronics, for all kinds of noise suppression and other reasons. But I haven't seen a residential application where it's critical for the living space. And the reason is most people want light and air access for their living. And it's cheaper. It's cheaper to build up than to build in the ground. It's very expensive to excavate and do concrete and all that work. It is more expensive, and to manage the storm, the stormwater, groundwater, everything else that comes with that. And I think, you know, we've certainly come to this recommendation from years of consultation and discussions with council about how do we make them more livable community, and basements were seen as something that really increased excavations, increased the loss of trees and natural open space, you know, with deeper basements, and produced in some cases really unlivable spaces for people that weren't as good for the community. That's what the feedback staff are trying to reflect. And because the province is looking for SMUH with 3 stories, right, and higher, we were thinking, oh, okay, there's some usefulness to calibrate these things collectively and to create an overall a new standard. It is new, it is a change, we understand that, but a new standard that could theoretically work for the community within the constraints that we have passed down by the province.
Okay. One last question, and I'll give you my decisions on your 4 corrections. Excuse me. What is the consequence of eliminating SLEA? Like, would that potentially reduce the likelihood of owners on small lots applying for subdivision? And if that's the case, is the subdivision really not as necessary under SMUH? So it's kind of a 2-part question.
Before SLEA, applicants had to apply to rezone individually on a site-by-site basis. They would rezone first, get council permission for that, and then they'd seek the approving officer's permission to subdivide. The SLEA was really just created for an area-based permission from council for people to just apply for subdivision without having to go through individual rezoning. People could still theoretically apply to rezone, right? If you eliminated SLEA, they just have a 2-step process as opposed to just going to the approving officer for subdivision. The challenge for us is we thought, well, it was never conceived of 4 or 6 units on the newly created lots. Right. And the servicing demand and the fact that you now have really narrow lots and the driveways and very little curb space to park all those, you know, visitors and others that might be using the parking space, it just creates a whole lot of constraints that weren't contemplated when SLEA was first developed. And we thought it might be excessive, you know, in terms of the permission. And the fact that it was all about creating sensitive infill. That was the purpose of SLEA. And SMUH essentially does that. It creates an infill opportunity for every owner with an existing lot of units, up to 4 in certain lots and up to 6 in others. And so that seems to could satisfy the demand for multi-generational housing.
And then the existing SLIAs probably might fall under the SMU of 3, because they're probably smaller lots.
Yeah, they're typically not that small. We
They're
only
not
have-
that small? Okay.
Yeah, we only have 53 lots that are under 3,000 square current.
Okay, so getting to your 4 directions, I'm gonna kind of go backward. SLIA, we can do away with the prohibition of basements. Yes, given that, what was said. I like the neighborhood consistency, so I like that. The general approach one, I'm gonna give you that a little later. I'm not sure yet. There's a lot here.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take it back to the 30,000 square foot level. It's really high up there.
What size lot is that,
I don't have a lot of questions right now. I think staff have done a really thoughtful job in preparing this report, and I think in presenting it very clearly. There's a lot here, but just in terms of the direction that you're looking for, I think there's fairly broad support for the prohibition of fully buried basements. I'm certainly hearing that in the community. People recognize the benefit of getting homes out of the ground for all the reasons that have been mentioned. And I think we're in the most painful phase of implementing SMU. I mean, it's a big change that's going to happen very gradually as best we can predict at this point. And when you see these new multiplexes being built in other communities, it's a big change. But I think there's going to be a big change anyways with what we're proposing with bringing basements up. This is a big change for the district. And it is going to change the look and landscape of neighborhoods over years and decades. So I think to do it now makes sense. And I think the neighborhood consistency with the 2 zones, SMU and single family, makes sense to do it that way. So for both of those items, I certainly support. I have some questions about some of the details as well, like in terms of the setbacks. I don't know if 10 feet is the number, and maybe it needs to be looked at that we have a higher setback there. I'd like to see what more configurations look like, because I think we are trying to be fairly flexible in what we're going to be allowing. So I'd like to kind of visually see some renderings of what different configurations would look like. On the whole, I'm supportive of what's being looked at here tonight.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murray, followed by Councillor Pope. Go ahead, Councillor Murray.
So if we were to look at this, Kevin, so it's if we go to the 9,000 square feet, it's split up between 2 buildings in total, right? Okay. Or it could be 1 building. It could be 1 building. Okay, well, this is a 9,600 square foot home in West Van in the properties. I think the taxes are $4,600 or $46,000 a year. It's on a 23,000 square foot lot, and it's 3 stories. So, just, you want some visuals? We should go on a bus tour. On a bus tour through the properties. Through the properties, because the vast majority of houses up there are anywhere between the new ones, between 9,000 and 11,000 square feet. You can get bigger ones. Then there's the smaller ones that are around 5,000. Those are the teeny ones, the 5,000 square footers. I have the benefit of experiencing all of this over 30 years. And when I got elected, basements weren't submerged. I lived in a rancher with a basement, and it had windows in it, our basement. All of it except the back wall, which was buried. It was the front part of the lot. The house that I owned, a 3-story, 5,000 square foot house on a 12,000 square foot lot. I've spoken about it before. It was a 3-quarter basement, had windows all throughout it. All the bedrooms had legal access, and it was a bright basement. and you could totally live in it. I had, people living in the basement. It was a really nice basement. Then when we started to begin redevelopment, 10 years in, the thought was bigger's better. And that was Ernie talking about, monster houses. And monster houses started to come in. And when monster houses were being marketed, they wanted full height ceilings. They wanted 10-foot ceilings in the entry hall. And North was famous for that. If you look at any of the North homes in the North Shore, he had big entryways and a dining room on the left and a living room on the right and the big island in the rear with the family room, the bedrooms upstairs, but it was the full with the spiral staircase went up the front. It was just it was a book plan. And that was why they submerged the basements, because they wanted to maintain those full heights, because they were marketing to a different clientele. And that is why they submerged them. And they were horrific. I remember going, when we were looking for a house to live in, I remember I went into one in Inland Valley, and I was horrified by the fact that you had to look up to look outside. And we allowed that. We absolutely love that. Now we're doing the exact opposite. We're pulling it right out, and we're adding more density. And those North houses, go and look at them. They're 6,000 square feet, 5,500 square feet on 3 levels. Tons of them up in Inland Valley. There's some of them down on the river off the Seymour in my neighborhood. They're big houses, 5,500 square feet, 6,000 square feet. We're talking about adding another 3,000. You live in a neighborhood with big houses. Look at some of those houses and square footage, and I would suggest any member of council or the community, look at realtor.com and go through the houses. It will tell you the lot size, it'll tell you the size of the house, it'll tell you the levels, everything that you need to know. And you can start imagining what a 9,000 square foot house is going to look like on a fraction of a piece of property like that, or even a 12,000 square foot piece of property. A house like that is massive. So I'm curious as to why we feel that the pendulum always needs to swing from one end to the other. First, the basements are submerged. Now we're completely removing them and elevating all of that density underground that we didn't used to count above ground. And do we think that's going to work out better? I just don't think it's reasonable to suggest that we need 9,000 square feet on an RS2 lot in the district for multi-generational housing. In Blue Ridge, unlike Capilano, went through a period of time over 5 or 6 years, when all of those building permits were coming in, and it was when you were, I think, still on council, and Edgemont was pushing back so hard, the Capilano, because of what was happening to the trees, the lot lines, they were excavating for these full basements, and then it shifted, and in the Seymour, people were buying houses, old houses, postmoderns, post and beams, and they were renovating them. They weren't tearing them down and building new houses. They were taking old houses and they were doing some significant renovations, but maybe just some updates, because people were living differently and they didn't need this much space. We don't talk about the environmental impact of any of this. It is massive. The greenhouse gas emissions created by tearing down all these houses and building new ones is exponential. And we never talk about how we're measuring what we're doing. We look at this through one lens, and we don't look at the unintended consequences. And there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences that we're not addressing, because we're not having the full discussion about what it's going to cost us, what the environment is going to have to manage through. What about the transportation? And so I just, I think that this is, we've been dealt this horrific hand by the government, and I don't think they even understand the unintended consequences of this. I think it's going to sink them, and it already is. It's so frustrating for municipalities to have to deal with this, and with no real little logic. I cannot understand for the life of me, in a community like ours, why the province doesn't think that we need some parking if we're going to put in 6 units in a neighborhood up in Blue Ridge or in Lynn Valley. It is absolutely ridiculous. We are not in Dunbar. We are not in Kitsilano. we are not in the denser parts of Mount Pleasant or South Vancouver. I just think that we need to see a whole bunch more examples and really ask ourselves why we need to pull all of that basement out. Why does a family of four with a son with a wife and a couple of kids that want to have intergenerational living like you, how big's your house?
Gross 4,700.
And you've had multi-generational,
8 people living.
you have 8 people living in your house. I had 7 living in my house. I had 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and there was tons of room. Like, so I question, it's always this feast or famine with us. Just because we don't want to do those basements anymore doesn't mean that there is an inherent right to pull out all of that space underground and pull it up, where the sun shines. It is just absolutely not necessary. And we are contradicting ourselves when we talk about environmental impact and, doing more with less or less with more and trying to manage a better way of living going forward. All we're doing is just everything is bigger, spend more, buy more, shop more, build more, tear down more.
Right. I do have to move along, but.
Well, I'm not going to make a decision on this. I'm going to vote against it if you're asking for a decision tonight, because I don't think we have all the answers. And
Tonight's is to help them prepare a bylaw for our consideration at a regular meeting of council. And so the input we give will help them narrow that so we don't have to craft it again on the floor at that time.
But we have asked, there's many of us that have asked for more examples of things. So is that going to be coming back? How are you going to do that?
We'll ask at the very end, what's next? And I'm going to come to you, Mr. Zeng, to do a full on what's next at the end, if that's okay. The next speaker I have is Councillor Pope and back. Councillor Pope, go ahead.
I'll defer to Councillor Back, and then if you come back to me.
Okay, Councillor Back, go
My
ahead.
point was just like, if staff could just quickly clarify the basements, because Councillor Murray mentioned several times that we're prohibiting basements and bringing it all up, but we're not prohibiting basements altogether. Partial basements are still very much allowed as part of this, yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But you don't have to have a partial basement if you don't want, right?
We're getting rid of the incentive to having a basement, and I think that's fair.
It
That's
was
been the
important to
discussion
clarify,
that we've
because-
had all the way along.
Yeah.
Discussion on it.
But can we clarify, you can bring 9,000 square feet up above. It doesn't, you don't have to have a basement.
That's right.
Yeah,
And just
so
to
that-
clarify,
there's
the
the point.
9,000 square feet would only be permitted in the 5 or 6 unit SMUH. So you can't have a house that's 9,000 square feet.
8,000
still.
square feet on a 4 dwelling. And the other thing to consider, which we haven't mentioned at all tonight, is each of those escalations has quite a significant contribution to the municipality for the additional dwellings that are in it. So,
But if it's stratified, then it's market.
no, I know, I'm just saying that it's unlikely that someone's going to build a building for one family that's gonna be anywhere near that size, because they would be at the 7,500 cap, or if it's only 1 or 2 dwellings, it's the lower number on it. And
They do
then
it in West
anything
End.
over 3 dwellings, they have to pay the per unit, per dwelling surcharge on it. Mr. Miller.
One helpful clarity, I have a question for Kevin that I think council would be helpful. The current caps in house suite and coach house scenarios, so our current zoning, are those caps generally in line with the caps being recommended here for the 1, 2, and 3 unit sites?
Yeah, they are in line. Yeah, so what we have proposed for the 1, 2, and 3 units is almost exactly the same as what you can permit under our existing zoning. It's just more of it will be above ground.
Yeah, because
So for sure, I recognize that the buildings will be bigger visually.
more.
Councillor Back, you have the floor.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, Councillor Pope.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this work. It's very well laid out, and I appreciate the depth of it. Thank you. I actually just have a couple of quick questions. The subdivisions and small lot infill areas, how many SLIA units, SLIAs are there? Lots?
There are approximately 1,000 SLIA lots. But when we do the lot width calculation, only about 85 of them are wide enough to subdivide into 10-meter lots.
Okay, that's what I thought you said, so only 85 would be sort of eligible potentially. And so I support the staff recommendation on that with not enabling SMU on those. And I also, of course, support prohibiting fully buried basements. I'm about the setbacks. I'm also supportive of what you propose there, which is basically the same as what we have now. And I think the reason being because so many people have their garages, 10 feet back from their from the property line now, and people are very comfortable with that. And I think that's why when you heard the engagement results that you would have found that it that people I forget who was talking about the engagement results, but that people were very favorable on that item. I would like to see that engagement again, if that could be sent out between now and the next time this comes forward, because it wasn't just surveys, as was mentioned. It also involved meetings at
The pop-ups, yeah.
the pop-up meetings, but also I think there was one at school, and it was a lot of different people showing up who had a lot of input, and it is not to be ignored. Density, fine with guiding. So overall, I'm very supportive of the general approach to SMUH. Thank you.
I had a question about a primary, the maximum size of the primary dwelling. So let's say I'm in the 4 units total camp. I've been bonused 500 square feet for the additional, one of those additional units, I believe. I've got about a 7,500 square foot total then on a pretty, not an extraordinary lot, not 10,000 square foot lot as a ballpark. It's not an extraordinary lot for the district. What percentage am I required to keep as the primary versus the minimum units? I mean, we've produced lock-off suites and small units in the 300 square foot range. The forum proposal is 140 square foot to 170 square foot. Can someone just produce 300 square foot dwellings and then produce a 6,500 square foot main house? Or is there a ratio of the unit sizes to make it so that if it is a large house, that some of that benefit, a significant portion of that benefit is going to producing larger secondary, tertiary, quaternary, whatever you want to call it, additional units? I mean, with our overarching goal of trying to produce family units generally where we can, or are we creating a workaround where somebody can produce a bunch of small lock-offs and then produce a massive main house?
Yeah. Captain, do you want to?
It's a great question, and it's one I've been mulling. And part of the reason I was thinking about it was about 6 months ago, you said to me, should we have a minimum unit size? And we used to, and we don't have that anymore in most zones. And it was one of the reasons we were debating the merits of a tiered density, because just as you used to see, back in the day, people pretend they didn't have a suite and then put the suite in afterwards, you could see almost the reverse. Oh yes, it's a suite, but it's actually added into the main house as a way of making your main house larger. Because in the North Shore market, you do see builders like North that like to build luxury homes. So it is something that we're very cognizant of, but there are tools we could use to manage that if it became a problem, like a minimum unit size for secondary suites or for additional suites in the SMU situation. Or we could just not do the tier density, that we're not married to it, but just recognizing that on the average lot size, then the units do get quite small. And if we want those family-oriented potential units, then it's something to consider. And also, if you think about the different people who have reached out over the last year under just regular house suite coach house zoning, to say, I really want to build a coach house when I'm having a problem, that 500 square feet extra for the coach house might make all the difference for them. So that was part of why we were thinking about it, even for the R2, the house suite coach house zone, as well as potentially increasing it in the multiplex zone. So very good question. You're bang on the money there.
I'm supportive of a minimum unit size, and if we're giving a 500 square foot bonus, we should be putting that bonus into the units. Or in some form, I'd be supportive of that. All right, the whole topic makes me grumpy. I'm not blaming staff for this, but you know what would make me very happy? You can call it the grumpy person slide. A rendering that shows the worst case scenario. And not because I want to dwell on the worst case scenario, because I'm trying to anticipate
The worst case scenario.
the most impactful one that we're going to get called out on. It's not going to be the guy that builds sensitively amongst the neighbors, similar to the block face and whatever. It's going to be the person who doesn't give a rip about the neighbors and just wants to cube out the building on the site. And so a rendering that shows, just so you know, with these guardrails, this is possible. It's not likely, but it's possible. And you could, you know, change your setbacks or do something else to address it.
Sorry, yeah, we can go back with that. I mean, that'd be easy to model. You don't even have to put windows on it.
Yeah, just ask the first builder out there. They're gonna, they'll do it for you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Vancouver special, right? The Vancouver special is what it was, you know, this is what I can do to cube it out and have no other problems. And so all of a sudden that just got repeated everywhere and all the Vancouver special for that. Okay, but I do appreciate staff's efforts on this. But I'm still having a lot of difficulty with us being in this situation. I've made my comments yesterday. They apply to today. I don't need to repeat them. But I appreciate the feedback and the effort that staff have put into this. I have no further speakers at this time. I'm prepared to go to the public to see if they want to use the last 10 minutes for public input. Okay, I'm going to go to the public. Would anybody like to speak? Ms. Gregor, please. And I have a virtual participant as well, Eric, Jensen, and David, and then right there. So that'll be the 4 speakers. Ms. Gregor, go ahead.
Mayor Little's request for hard case examples of the worst and not just the biggest, but for the very inside. I'd like to see that very much.
Thank you. We're just getting the virtual participants moved over to the panel. David, I see you're on the panel, and Eric Jensen. So I think Eric Jensen, you were first. Eric Jensen, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now I can, clearly. Welcome. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
I don't need 3 minutes. I won't take up too much of your time. I think that, I think the thought of having Surrey monster homes in our backyard here on the North Shore is a frightening prospect to me anyways, as a long-term North Shore resident. I really quite scared of that being thrust upon us. The Cavalierness of where we are taking basements right out of the ground and putting them above ground, also alarming, and that we have done so already. I mean, you guys all know already, I've spoken a lot of times about that in front of you, so I'm not going to go down that road too much today. You guys all know where I stand on that particular fact, and yeah, anyways, I've spoken to that lots. So one of the things that I found interesting though was staff was suggesting that people are going to get more FSR if they're going to build additional dwelling units under the same roof, and I was listening to that and hearing that. And as somebody who's actually doing this work on an ongoing basis, guys, what's going to happen is people are going to do this work, build these structures, build these homes, and then the second they pass final inspection, a wall is going to come down, a modification is going to get made, and there is absolutely zero way that anybody in the room tonight or that works at the DNV is going to be able to manage or monitor those sorts of activities that happen after the fact. So, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. And Mike and Lisa, I am fully on board with where you guys are coming from. I think that the province is way overstepping and people really aren't understanding or realizing the magnitude and the ramifications of forcing this down our throats. And certainly there really is, I have heard a lot of, I don't know, and we'll figure it out from staff when it comes to how are we going to accommodate and facilitate this increased demand. Like, I mean, where are we going to get the additional fresh water from? Guaranteed the sewage treatment plant has been built for the number of people that are here on the North Shore currently, not for the 50% or more people that could be accommodated by this new type of housing. So I'll leave it there, guys, but I think we really need to be really careful and thoughtful about how this is going to happen. And again, like I don't think anybody wants to have Surrey monster homes in their backyard. Like that's just not the North Shore community, and I think we got to fight hard against this.
Thank you for your comments, Eric Jensen. Virtual participant David, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Clearly, welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Eric, as well. To kind of further talk about the monster homes, I do want to further clarify that as well, because I do hear conversation about monster homes and multi-generational family living. But I understand that when we talk about 4 and 6 units, these are stratified. These are separate units on the market. And that does not imply one homeowner in 6 units or any form of multi-generational family living guarantee. I do like the idea of a minimum size unit, and I do think I like the idea of a maximum size unit. And I don't know if there are codes and regulations, including fire code, around insulation, multiple entrances, et cetera, that each of these units would have to live up to put anyone at ease for walls coming down inside and everything else for modifications afterwards. In terms of the FSR and trying to make spaces that are good for families, I am very interested in staff to relook at the 6-unit SMUH. A lot of those areas, I think there's actually a bunch of lots at 4,000 square foot. So at a 1 FSR, we're talking about studios and maybe the odd 1 bedroom going in on those lots very close in the marine corridor. And as well, I'm curious if in this conversation around basements, if underground parking is considered. I think for, again, some of the smaller lots in higher density areas, if the market is considering, building to what the market needs around parking, the only way to even have units above 600 square foot would be if some of that FSR is, if the parking is actually underground in that aspect. So thank you for your guys' time and consideration with all these things. And I hope that council and staff are able to get to a great point in planning ahead for our communities here in June.
Thank you for your comments. David, joining us here in person. Yeah, Paulo, please.
Yeah, and I'd like to have higher, like, 2024 was happened to 2019. We know we get to send back on the property lines. So now it just happened a couple days ago, the water main broke down, over 20 vehicles. So I'm supported to all the basement up, or maybe portion, like a couple feet more up. So that's what it is. In the left line there. Now I walk in the front every time. I see sand back there on the front of the road. And then we cut the bridge. The water car had to go over the bridge. You know that? We cut the bridge, station to the bridge.
Yeah.
So now, you just get in the water, remotely, jump over, I 24 myself, I went to clean them up the ditch. It was very cold. Really, the fireman, they come out. Okay, and it was lots of work. First of all, we have to maintain those trees. And they have a couple times, Frederick, to our last score, full maintenance. Now they haven't frozen. So now why we have to go 7 feet down on the ground? I know those houses are now 60, 70 years old, 80 years old. Let's change in 2026. I know you're saying I'm confused. He says I'm confused. Everybody's confused with 2026. I don't bring West Vancouver, rich property, very rich over there. Let's make something better for North Hill, make them stronger. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Paul.
We just have
Mr. Zhang.
summary slide with Jason here on the next steps.
Okay.
Yes, again, thank you for a great conversation over 2 days. We spent over 4 hours in the last 24 hours talking about SHAPE, and had some great feedback from council in terms of helping shape how we will move forward with this. So we will be undertaking a very kind of limited form of public engagement at the informed level. It's outlined in the report. So the next community bulletin will be on the topic of Bill 25 and kind of providing some facts to the community about that, and also a segment on the zoning bylaw rewrite as well. And there'll be links in there for people to make comments on both of those topics to staff as well, so that we can have some form of public engagement in advance of that first reading in mid-April. That's pretty much what we were able to do given the context and timing that we had. You will be coming back in March with a report on the extension and some of the options around how to address the issues that we talked about in terms of preserving the frequent transit area around Lionsgate. So you'll be seeing that in March. Similarly, another report in March addressing the further analysis on rental tenure zoning and that affordable or supportive unit for the 6th unit. That will be provided to council as well. We will have some discussions internally, perhaps about other opportunities to bring back those examples and renderings that we discussed tonight that council or members of council would like to see, just to get a better sense of the range of what might be enabled through some of the changes that we're being compelled to do in response to Bill 25. We will also, obviously I had mentioned, April will be the zoning bylaw amendments and the OCP amendments necessary to implement small scale multi-unit housing, in addition to the broader discussion that we're about to enter into on the zoning bylaw rewrite. And then further work will be done as we kind of solidify our approach on SHMU about implementation guides. So communicating, some of the conversation we had around servicing, some of the challenges, despite if you have the zoning, there are other considerations you need to consider before you will be permitted to build a SHMU. So there'll be some further work that will be brought to council outlining our approach for implementation once we get through the actual bylaw piece as well.
I'll just quickly add at the end, really appreciate all the feedback from council and from members of the public. It was a lot of work on staff's end, and we definitely kind of empathize and sympathize with some of the concerns that were mentioned, the unintended consequences, the environmental impacts, the bill form impacts to the neighborhood. And perhaps something worth mentioning is the difference between Bill 44 and Bill 25 is Bill 44 set out all the regulations and what we have to implement and the guidelines that we have to consider. But what's key in Bill 25 is the province has given itself the power to enact zoning bylaws on our behalf, specifically relating to the siting, size, dimension, location, type, form, or density of housing units. So it's under that context, we've had these kind of internal debates, almost the same conversations that we had tonight. Oh, okay, would this work? But these are the province recommendations, etc. So we've had these discussions. Really appreciate the comments tonight, and I would look forward to bringing back the next steps.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Council, we've completed the business of this evening's meeting. I'll accept adjournment.
So moved.
Accept it from Councillor Ma. Thank you very much, staff, for your presentation, and we're going to Give everyone a chance to have a stretch. We'll start the next meeting in about 5 minutes' time.